Hello, and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out in the southern direction to the southeast of Huliaipole. The Russians continue their probing attacks here to the southeast of Huliaipole, where they are attempting to expand their zone of control as they have found a gap in the Ukrainian defenses. And in this section of the front line, they've now managed to adjust their front line according to a bunch of forest lines and a river line here to the south of Melinivka. They'll likely continue going in an eastward direction to gain full control over the river line and the forest lines here to the south of the Ukrainian villages. And with this, we see that the situation is constantly developing, even in areas that were previously lacking of any movement. The last time that the front line moved in Huliaipole was prior to the Ukrainian summer offensive. So that's a very long time ago. What we do see is that here in the southern front, now that we're talking about this area, the river line of the Dnieper River used to be, after the Novokhovka Dam blew, very narrow, as you can see with this picture here. Now, however, months after this case happened, we now see that the Dnieper River returned to what it was, and with this we can see that the river itself will act as it has been, which is a natural barrier, and it makes them more difficult for the Ukrainians to cross over. With their motorboats, they have to cross over a larger distance, and they have to move further to get a foothold and such. This allows the Russians to attack these Ukrainian crossings prior to them reaching the coastline. We then move on to the next section of the front line, which is here to the west of Avdiivka, where the Russians have made another small advancement here within the village of Berdishi in the northern parts of the village towards the central parts. And here, positional fighting happened between a Russian tank, a Russian BMP, and Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle of the Bradley type. Where the Bradley was shooting from a long range, the tank was completely ignoring it before the tank was hit by an FPV drone. But based on this footage, we see that the Russians got closer and moved closer to the front, where the Ukrainians were trying to prevent such an advance, but failed to do so due to the tank just simply ignoring the Bradley. And finally, the FPV drone came in and destroyed the tank. So in the end, the FPV drones end up being worth more than a Bradley when it comes to Bradley versus tank fighting. Now, this is simply what happened according to footage from the 47th Mechanized Brigade on the Ukrainian side. There was no footage on the Russian side of this assault, and the Ukrainians naturally cut out any negative things, so there was nothing negative on the Ukrainian side in this video, only negative for the Russians, other than the advancements that took place. So we cannot gain a proper picture unless they get both sides of the picture when it comes to these videos of the fighting. What we do see is that the Russians are slowly advancing. So if the Ukrainians are constantly destroying the Russians, then it makes no sense that they will continuously advance. The fighting here to the west of Avdiivka is continuously positional, with the recent advance here by the Russians north of Tonenka towards the northern parts. The Ukrainians were recently completely kicked out of Fortifications, which means that the Russians will likely gain full control of it soon. With the reports of fighting reaching Semenivka as well, that is likely true. And with the direction of Berdishi, we see that the Russians are continuously inching forward, trying to capture the rest of the village. So with this, the Russians have regained the initiative here to the west of Avdiivka. It is currently very slow advances, but it will likely increase in speed as they reach and go past the Ukrainian fortifications and push them into a retreat away from these villages, similar to what happened in the first villages like Lasoshkine and Sheverne, here to the west of Avdiivka. We then move on to the Bmud section of the front line, where here we see this video here, which shows a Russian armored assault on Ukrainian positions. This assault takes place somewhere to the west of Bmud. It is not clear where it's taking place, as I do not have any geolocation of the fighting. What I do know is that there is a river line. This is likely by Khomove to the south of it. We do see that there are numerous trenches that the Russians are fighting through. They drive through to these Ukrainian positions and drive by the trenches, where they then storm the Ukrainian positions within the trenches and try to overrun the Ukrainian positions. These are mainly IFVs, and then there's also BMPs that drop off soldiers. for them to capture these positions after the infantry fighting vehicles push the Ukrainians out of them. And now this is a Russian video where we see the Russians moving up to these positions and capturing a few trenches. And then we may or may not see Ukrainian video showing these infantry fighting vehicles get hit by FPV drones. That was the point I was making in Berdishi. There was a Ukrainian video. We saw the Ukrainian success. This is a Russian video. We see Russian success. That is unfortunately the sort of warfare that I'm covering. Whoever releases the videos will only release the videos where they win and never release the videos where they lose. And as such, we get a biased point of view unless both sides release videos of the same battle. That is where we get a clearer picture. Thankfully, we have a lot of videos being released in Berdishi. This allows me to later on, once the battle has ended, to make a recap of that battle over the village to get a clear picture of exactly how the battle went due to a lot of videos coming out from that village. As we can see here from the mapping, there is a load of fortifications here to the west of Bmud. We also saw it in the video, constant trenches everywhere, and the Russians have to go through all of them to capture these positions. And this is likely why the advances are so slow, because they constantly have to go through these fortifications to actually reach the front line and move beyond it. And this makes it very difficult. Even if there's only a few Ukrainian soldiers, still be able to hold on to these positions for a long time. But there is a lot going to the section of the front line to hold the front and prevent further Russian advances. And this is why we're getting a lot of positional fighting. As long as these soldiers man up these fortifications, the advances are going to be slow. However, at some point we will reach a tipping point, and that tipping point will come either of two reasons. The first one would be if one side launches a massive offensive and simply overruns the fortifications and breaks through before the next level or next layer of fortifications are manned, to then consolidate a breakthrough and gain huge swaths of territory due to them being able to overcome these fortifications by sheer power in one concentrated point. The other would be if this battle of attrition ends with one of either sides losing, because there is a lack of ammunition, there's a lack of infantry, whichever the case, meaning that the Ukrainians, if they were to lose, would run out of manpower or ammunition and would not be able to defend these fortifications, and the Russians would simply be able to take them without a fight. Or if the Russians were to lose the battle of attrition, that they simply were unable to continue launching offensive operations and the initiative would switch back to the Ukrainians. This brings us to the fact that the Ukrainians are constantly complaining about a lack of vehicles, lack of ammunition, a lack of manpower, everything right now. Yet they still launch these cross-border assaults, and now they have managed to gain a foothold within the village of Kovski, here to the north of the Kharkov region into the Belgorod region. And with this, the Ukrainians, or the Free Russia Legion, has their first foothold across the borderline, which is just a tiny path of a village 200 meters from the borderline, and with this river separating the northern and southern parts. According to these Free Russia Legion, they have captured the whole village, but according to Russian sources, even this small path is they have been pushed out of, and what they actually took pictures of was in a forest area, so it is likely that they did not capture the village itself. According to the information from Russian soldiers fighting by the border area, the statement of the Ukrainian armed forces about the seizure of the administration in the village of Kovski, Kravoyoronsky district, is a fake. The enemy was never able to cross the city. So according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians were not able to gain control of the city and instead, or the village, but instead were pushed out of it. And this small advance did happen, but they were pushed out. What we don't really know the situation right now other than what they say, so we have to take everything they say with a grain of salt, but at the same time report on it, because that is all the information we have. I hope that through this video I gave you a better insight to some of the thoughts that go through when I report on these updates and how much I have to analyze and go through to get a proper overview of the situation. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe and check me out on Patreon.